Welcome to Smart People on Ice. I'm Alex Bennick. Today I'm fortunate to be joined by Raj Patel, the head of technical operations at Pinterest. I checked Alexa this morning, and Pinterest is the number 12 ranked site by page views, so obviously a very large-scale infrastructure. And Raj, earlier in his career, has been always on the operational side, so operating a number of large-scale environments going back to Exodus, at Yahoo, as well as at Cisco WebEx. So Raj, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Alex. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So can you tell me about your early days coming up, how you got into technology and infrastructure in the first place?
So I think I came to the United States at the age of 15.
Yeah.
And among the immersion of all kinds of things at that interesting age, I fell into love with technology at a part-time job, building clone x86 machines for a business and tinkering with all kinds of boards and processors and memory and all of that. And the rest is history. But what defines me and what I've really enjoyed is just being a perpetual student of technology, right? And for me, I've just been very fortunate to have been associated with some of the more interesting technologies and people and firms that have defined some of our times.
Sure. And when did you get into networking and communications? Was that in college or after school?
So I think my journey throughout the college was actually working and at the same time going to school, and it was all somewhat intermingled. But right out of college, actually went to Pacific Bell and got some hard dosage of how large-scale networks and environments worked.
I did not know you were a bellhead.
Yeah.
I thought you were always this internet guy, but the deep, dark secrets are revealed.
Yeah. So I actually started out as a power engineer, if you can imagine that, dealing with minus 48 volts, and here I am, just been able to experiment with all kinds of things that has defined internet technologies for us.
So I know you spent sort of maybe a decade or thereabouts in the Bell system. Looking back on it, is there a lesson learned or something that you take away, from the engineering or operations culture, that time gave you?
So I think when I look back, it's there's certainly different dimensions of culture that you need to learn. But as an early engineer, as an early practitioner, what some of these firms do is actually teach you discipline, right? And there was a time in my career where I was actually managing the SS7 network and the 911 network for the state of California. And if you put it in a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of things that require reliability, those are some of those things that require
11 probably.
Yeah, like somewhere along those lines, right? And then as you progress, you learn all that discipline, and then you have to kind of have what at least I've found helpful is to be able to dial it back to the appropriate level of agility and culture that you need, because there's certainly attributes of that you don't necessarily need to apply to, especially to, let's say, a place like Pinterest.
Sure.
So
there's certainly amounts of cost required to reach that type of availability that are not always necessary, right?
Yeah, but mostly like just dealing with really, really large scale stuff that really needs to work, and how do you do that?
Yeah. So then, you left the empire of the Bell system and, came onto the internet, and back in, what was this, early 2000 time frame?
Yeah, early 2000. So eventually left Pacific Bell to actually pursue a venture-funded thing after around 99 time frame, a place called Corion, which was a ASP of sorts for large service providers, and sort of then ended up at Exodus Communications, which was sort of a defining company in the data center space.
Yeah, absolutely. They're certainly one of the classic examples of the internet, internet and telecom boom of the late 90s and 2000s. I was looking into it today. Exodus had something like 20 straight quarters of 40% quarter-over-quarter revenue growth, which was unbelievable, but really pioneered the internet co-location business model.
Yeah.
And then, they had a sort of a miraculous up and down cycle. Yeah. Where in that wave did you join the story?
Yeah, so my time at Exodus, I characterize it as the guy that was handing out orange juice after the party was over, roughly. It was around the 2000 time frame. So it was certainly after the large part of the scaling and the euphoria. What I learned there was like how tremendously capital intensive that actually business is, and what are the type of things that can go right or wrong. But I find a very interesting parallel to the time that we live in right now, which is Exodus in its time dramatically reduced the barriers of entry for a class of web-based businesses at that time. Before that, if you needed to do something, you needed to get a building, get a data center, buy all your stuff, maybe in a closet, in a computer room, whatever that may be. And then I think those barriers of entry were dramatically reduced by a firm like Exodus globally, right?
Yep.
And I see a very similar trend today, parallel today with cloud computing, which Amazon and many have pioneered, right? Which has really reduced the barriers of entry for another great class of firms to actually exist. And I was thinking about this before this talk today, and I wonder if a firm like Pinterest would actually exist if it wasn't for the public cloud today.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the parallel. You're taking a large upfront, capital expenditure, CapEx cost, and then transforming that into a consumption-based, pay-as-you-go model. And I think you're right. It, lowers the cost for getting new businesses started, and that just dramatically increases the amount of experimentation that one can do. And certainly from our perspective, overall is a good thing. Anything that fosters more entrepreneurship is very exciting. So then you stuck around. I know Exodus was acquired by Cable & Wireless, which was then acquired by Savvis, which was then acquired by CenturyLink recently. So I think those data centers still exist with a few different logos. But then you ended up, really experiencing some pretty tremendous operational scale when you showed up at Yahoo. So what was going on in the period you joined?
Yes, I think when I think about the time at Yahoo, it was just really an exciting time and a euphoria of growth, right? The user base around the world was growing quite a bit, and if I can characterize the time at Yahoo, it was really about scale, right? And scale in three dimensions. One in scale in technology, scaling of people, and then scaling of even processes that you need to really deliver a consumer internet experience at that scale, right? And then actually witnessing some of those technologies now actually transferring into the enterprise, which now we call SaaS. And then that's what happened when I went to WebEx. But it was a great experience in scaling out those three dimensions. On the technology front, we sort of pioneered or worked on some very interesting things, like building a data center in middle of nowhere, not nowhere, Eastern Washington, and then nowhere from a network guy's perspective, because there wasn't a lot of fiber and networks and all that there at the time. Building a global CDN in a proxy, for example, and many of the other technology firsts that you need to do in what people now call massively scalable data centers, or how do you do like layer 3 inside of a large data center, for example, and all those interesting problems of scales from a technology standpoint. But equally important, I think it's about people scaling, right? Like, do you have the right team? And I was tremendously fortunate to have worked with some of the best engineers in infrastructure space that allowed us to grow that team and do all these innovations that are really neat. And then ultimately, it's about the little bit of the process framework that you need, and that is right-sized for that particular culture, so that it can actually grow. So I just thoroughly enjoyed that time.
And at that point, you had, you started off in networking, and then ultimately had networking and storage and a few other things, right?
Yeah, so we saw that early on, right? And as saw the coming together of network systems and storage in a common platform, whether it is management systems or actually, which we know now, which is actually hardware as well, right? So there is no really differentiation between network systems and storage. So we actually created a group called NSS, simple terms, Network Systems and Storage Engineering. And that became the sort of the the infrastructure team inside the
So
physical
you're thinking
walls
about
of a data
co-designing, you know,
center.
the storage requirements, their bandwidth and I/O and latency, along with the network resources.
Yeah, and I think you see with some of the things that you're doing as like the network actually getting finally catching up with some of the server technologies and virtualization, and finally I feel like some of the firms that are even in storage space that you're involved with are now doing that exact same thing, and I feel confident we can have that fabric that is really network systems and storage together.